Join us for a powerful story of transformation and community impact. John Davenport, a driven executive, finds his life changed after an unexpected encounter on a flight with Leah Porter, the new COO. What starts as a clash of perspectives becomes a journey of mentorship, where John learns that true leadership is built on trust, empathy, and supporting others. Alongside Leah and a promising intern named Marcus, John helps create a program that extends beyond the office, touching lives and reshaping futures, including his own. Can John overcome the challenges and doubts that test his resolve? And what legacy will he leave for those who follow? Stay tuned as we explore this heartfelt journey of growth and connection. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support more inspiring stories. Let's begin. The morning sun splintered across the glass panels of O'Hare International Airport, painting the bustling terminal with shards of golden light. Travelers hustled between gates, their footsteps a muted thrum that mingled with the hum of flight announcements. John Davenport stood at Gate 34A, checking his watch for the third time in as many minutes. The flight to Los Angeles was boarding soon, and the restlessness in the air matched the subtle tightness in his chest. Beside him, Chloe, his 10-year-old daughter, shifted her weight and gazed wide-eyed at the sea of passengers. A stuffed bear, worn and loved, peeked out from her small backpack. She clutched her inhaler, an ever-present reminder of her asthma, which had changed the rhythm of their lives 3 years ago. John's eyes softened as he glanced down at her, the executive mask slipping for a moment. "Daddy, why does everyone look so serious?" Chloe's voice, light and clear, broke through the airport's cacophony. "Airports make people hurry," John said, forcing a smile. "Everyone's trying to get somewhere fast." Chloe nodded as if he'd explained the mysteries of the world. John's smile faded as his thoughts wandered to the reason behind their trip. He was scheduled to present at an important executive meeting in Los Angeles, a make-or-break moment for his division. It should have been a routine trip, but the whispers of a new chief operations officer joining the company had set him on edge. Change often meant upheaval, and John valued stability above all. "Now boarding Group 1 for Flight 2468 to Los Angeles," the attendant's voice crackled over the PA system. John adjusted the collar of his tailored suit, took Chloe's hand, and led her toward the gate. The atmosphere of the airport melted away as they stepped into the long, narrow aisle of the plane. The scent of leather and citrus met them, a familiar marker of his preferred first-class travel. John found their seats, plush and wide, designed for luxury. He lifted Chloe into her window seat and stowed her backpack under the chair in front. She pressed her nose to the window, marveling at the ground crew below as they moved in synchronized chaos. The sight made John smile, a rare, unguarded moment. A soft cough beside him caught his attention. A woman was placing a sleek black bag into the overhead compartment. She was tall, with deep brown skin that seemed to glow under the cabin lights. Her hair, pulled into a low bun, highlighted high cheekbones and sharp eyes that flicked across the cabin with practiced observation. Leah Porter. John's pulse quickened. Something about her presence unsettled him, an instinct he could neither ignore nor fully understand. He glanced at her seat number and then at Chloe. Feeling a pang of protectiveness, he struggled to rationalize. "Excuse me," John called to a passing flight attendant. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Would it be possible for this seat to be moved to another part of the cabin?" There might have been a mix-up. The attendant's eyes flickered with surprise before smoothing into a practiced neutrality. "I'm afraid all seats are assigned, sir, but I can check if any last-minute changes are available." Leah turned, having caught the tail end of the exchange. Her gaze landed on John with a calm, unreadable expression. It wasn't the first time she'd experienced an unspoken request to step aside, but this moment held an added edge she couldn't ignore. Without waiting for the attendant's return, she lifted her bag and moved down the aisle, taking an empty seat in economy. Her movements were deliberate, graceful, and carried an unspoken statement. She would not contest, but she would remember. John shifted uncomfortably, the relief of securing space for Chloe mingling with a twinge of something darker. Guilt. The plane soared into the sky, the hum of engines pressing against the cabin. Chloe leaned back, eyes fluttering as sleep beckoned. John settled in, the tension easing from his shoulders. The silence felt like an invitation to reflect, but John rejected it, turning instead to his phone for distraction. Emails filled the screen, urgent subject lines that spoke of numbers, projections, and deadlines. Halfway through the flight, Chloe stirred, her small body twitching in her sleep. John glanced over, reassured by the steady rise and fall of her chest. Just then, the captain's voice crackled over the speakers, announcing that turbulence was expected. The plane dipped slightly, a collective murmur rippling through the cabin. Chloe's eyes snapped open, her expression shifting from confusion to panic as she struggled for breath. John's chest tightened as her gasps became rapid, desperate. He reached for her bag. No inhaler. The realization hit like ice. It was in the checked luggage. "Daddy, I can't—" Chloe's voice was thin, her hands clutching at her throat. John's panic mounted as the flight attendant hurried over, her face a mask of professional concern. The chaos blurred around him, every second stretching into an eternity. "Excuse me," a calm voice said, cutting through the noise. Leah Porter appeared at his side, her eyes sharp and focused. "I'm trained in first aid. May I help?" John nodded, the tension in his jaw loosening as helplessness gave way to hope. Leah knelt beside Chloe, her voice soft but firm. "Chloe, I need you to look at me, okay? We're going to breathe together." She demonstrated slow, deep breaths, and Chloe's wide eyes locked onto Leah's face, following the rhythm. The cabin fell into a hushed stillness as Chloe's breathing steadied, her small frame sinking back into the seat with a shudder. John's gaze met Leah's, gratitude mixing with something unspoken. She stood, nodded briefly, and returned to her seat in economy without another word. The hum of the engines returned, but the silence between them carried weight. The plane settled back into a steady altitude, the tremors from the turbulence fading into a distant memory. The cabin lights dimmed, casting a soft ambient glow over the passengers. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, while others chose to close their eyes, lulled by the steady hum of the engines. John sat rigid, his breath shallow as he watched Chloe's chest rise and fall with a now steady rhythm. Relief poured over him, followed closely by the sting of guilt. He flexed his fingers against the armrest, the imprint of his own helplessness still vivid. Chloe shifted in her sleep, a faint smile tugging at her lips as she exhaled. She would be fine, he assured himself, but the moment felt suspended, refusing to dissolve as quickly as the crisis had. Leah Porter's presence lingered like a shadow, a testament to intervention that went beyond mere professionalism. John's eyes slid toward the economy section, where Leah now sat with her gaze fixed out the window. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a sense of alertness in her expression that he hadn't noticed before. He recalled the quick, precise way she had responded, and a memory surfaced of something he'd read in her executive profile. Leah Porter had volunteered for medical missions before moving into corporate strategy, an intersection of expertise and empathy that had catapulted her career. It was a detail he had once skimmed, filed away as impressive but not relevant. Now it took on new meaning. "Is Chloe okay, sir?" The flight attendant's voice interrupted his thoughts. She glanced at Chloe, a hint of concern lingering in her eyes. "Yes," John managed, the word feeling heavy. "Thanks to Miss Porter." The attendant's lips pressed into a thin line, as if weighing whether to comment further. "She's quite remarkable. We're fortunate to have passengers like her." John nodded, unable to find words that could encapsulate the moment. The attendant moved on, leaving John with only his thoughts and the soft, rhythmic breathing of his daughter. He sank deeper into his seat, feeling the weight of pride and ego crumbling at the edges. The rest of the flight was uneventful, marked by occasional announcements and the subtle clatter of flight attendants serving meals. John picked at his food absently, glancing at the unremarkable landscape of clouds outside. His mind turned over the details of the day with relentless precision, replaying every glance, every word, every decision. Time stretched, and at last, The captain announced their descent into Los Angeles. The city sprawled below, a glittering expanse of lights that looked like scattered jewels against the darkening sky. Chloe stirred and blinked up at John, her eyes sleepy but clear. "Daddy, are we there?" she asked, voice small but steady. "We're almost there, sweetheart," John said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You're okay now." Chloe nodded, squeezing his hand before turning back to the window, captivated by the approach. The plane's wheels touched the ground with a soft thud, and the passengers collectively exhaled as the engines roared, slowing their momentum. A ripple of anticipation moved through the cabin as people readied themselves to disembark. John felt his heartbeat accelerate as he stood and gathered their belongings. Chloe's hand slipped into his, a familiar anchor that reminded him of his responsibility. Not just to protect, but to set an example. He looked back instinctively, meeting Leah's eyes for a brief second. Her expression was neutral, a professional mask that hinted at nothing personal. She offered a slight nod before looking away, letting the flow of passengers pull her down the aisle. The terminal was alive with the sound of rushing travelers, the automated announcements cutting through the noise as people dispersed to baggage claim and ground transportation. John walked with Chloe's small hand nestled in his, their pace leisurely, as they moved through the throng. "Daddy, can we get a snack?" Chloe asked, her energy returning now that the ordeal was behind them. "Sure, let's find something good," John replied, casting a glance at the airport's shops and kiosks. The brightly lit display of a coffee stand caught Chloe's eye, and she tugged him in that direction. John stood in line, his eyes drifting as he took in the scene. A group of businessmen huddled around their phones, families corralled children who were eager to run off, and solo travelers with earbuds in place walked with purpose. Among them, Leah Porter moved with practiced grace, her pace unhurried as she balanced her carry-on and phone. The fleeting moment from the plane replayed in his mind, this time sharper, more intrusive. He watched as Leah stopped to take a call, her expression softening as she spoke. It was strange, seeing her here among the crowd, not as an imposing figure, but as a person navigating the same mundane tasks. "Mr. Davenport." The sound of her voice pulled him out of his thoughts. She had ended her call and now stood just a few steps away, her gaze steady and unreadable. "Ms. Porter," he replied, his tone formal but faltering. Chloe looked up at them both, eyes darting between their faces with innocent curiosity. "I'm glad Chloe's feeling better," Leah said, inclining her head toward the little girl. "It's good to see her smiling." Chloe beamed, holding up her stuffed bear as if to contribute to the conversation. "This is Teddy. He's my favorite, and he was really brave today." Leah's smile deepened, and she bent slightly to meet Chloe's eyes. "I think you were the brave one, Chloe. Teddy was just helping." Chloe giggled, her earlier distress forgotten. John watched the exchange, the sting of guilt sharpening into something more complex, admiration, and perhaps something that bordered on envy. Leah rose, the moment stretching between them. "Thank you," John said finally, his voice thick with sincerity. "For everything." Leah's eyes met his, and for a moment the formality fell away. "You're welcome," she said softly, before turning to join the stream of passengers heading toward the exit. John stood there, Chloe's small hand in his, feeling the rumble of departing flights vibrate through the floor. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but he knew this moment would follow him, a silent reminder of lessons still to be learned. The following morning found John pacing the floor of his hotel room, his phone pressed to his ear as he navigated a call with the corporate team in Chicago. The conversation was tense, laden with pointed questions about the quarterly presentation he was expected to deliver that afternoon. Numbers, projections, and financial forecasts, each syllable compounded the weight on his chest. Chloe sat on the hotel bed, swinging her legs as she sketched a picture of a plane with clouds puffing around it. She glanced at her father occasionally, sensing the tension that emanated from him. When he finally ended the call, his expression was a study in strained composure. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" she asked, her voice small and tentative. John's features softened as he looked at her, the storm in his mind quieting for a moment. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just work. Chloe nodded, seemingly reassured, and returned to her drawing. John rubbed a hand over his face, the events from the flight still fresh in his memory. The thought of facing Leah Porter in a professional setting added another layer of tension. He had replayed the moment in the airport, their brief conversation, and Chloe's innocent contribution, turning it over in his mind until the words felt rehearsed. Yet nothing prepared him for the moment when reality would make an entrance. The office was a sleek expanse of glass and steel with panoramic views of downtown Los Angeles. The room hummed with the low murmur of conversations as executives trickled in, their voices mingling with the subtle clicks of laptop keyboards and the rustle of documents. John took his seat near the middle of the long table surrounded by colleagues he knew well, but now felt slightly distant from. A tall figure entered the room, and the quiet conversation stilled. Leah Porter, dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit, stood at the head of the table. The new chief operations officer, the same woman who had saved his daughter just 24 hours ago. John's stomach clenched, and he felt a bead of sweat trace a path along his temple. "Good afternoon, everyone," Leah began, her voice confident and even. It carried a warmth that contrasted with the usual stiff, corporate tone of such meetings. "I'm glad to be here and look forward to learning more about each of you as we navigate this new chapter." She continued with introductions and outlined the day's agenda. Her eyes swept the room, meeting each executive's gaze until they settled on John for a heartbeat longer than necessary. The recognition was mutual, but neither betrayed it in their expressions. Before we dive into today's data review, I'd like to emphasize that change, though challenging, often uncovers the potential we didn't know we had, Leah said, pausing for effect. "And I am here to make sure that potential is realized." A few nods of agreement rippled across the room, and John felt the room's attention shift, as if on cue. The presentation began, slides illuminating the issues they'd face in the coming fiscal year. John spoke when called upon, presenting his section with precision, but feeling as though the air between them was charged with unspoken history. The meeting adjourned with the typical chorus of rustling papers and hushed exchanges. Leah remained behind, speaking quietly with a few department heads. John lingered at the periphery, uncertain whether to stay or escape the room that suddenly felt too small. "John," Leah called, her tone polite but unmistakably pointed. "Could we speak for a moment?" A few heads turned subtly. Curiosity peaked before the room emptied and left them alone. Leah's expression softened as she approached, her eyes carrying neither accusation nor expectation. Just a simple openness that disarmed him. "I wanted to thank you again," John said, preempting any remarks she might make. "For Chloe? You didn't have to step in, but you did. I owe you for that." Leah's gaze shifted, a glimmer of understanding sparking behind her eyes. "I didn't do it for thanks, John. I did it because it was the right thing to do." He nodded, the silence growing between them like a tangible thing. Words felt inadequate. Explanations even more so. "It was eye-opening," he said finally, meeting her gaze. "In more ways than one." "I hope so," Leah replied, her voice dropping a note. "Because understanding that moment is only the first step." She turned back to her laptop, the conversation finished, but not closed. John took a deep breath and walked out, his thoughts swirling. The world outside the conference room buzzed on, unaware of the subtle shifts that were beginning to reshape him from the inside out. The afternoon sun slanted through the wide windows of their hotel room, casting long, warm beams across the floor. Chloe was stretched out on the bed, her sketchbook open in front of her. She looked up when John walked in, sensing a change in his demeanor. "Did your meeting go okay, Daddy?" she asked, tilting her head as she drew a cloud in the corner of the page. "It did," John said, his voice softer than usual. He sat down beside her, watching as she added tiny birds to her picture. "Did you know that you're my hero, Chloe?" Her eyes widened, and she giggled, hiding her face behind her bear. "No, Daddy, you're silly. I'm serious," he said, gently tugging the bear away. "You remind me to see things clearly, to be brave when it matters most." Chloe leaned into him, her small body warm and trusting. In that moment, John felt a profound sense of gratitude. For her, for the second chances that life offered, and for the lessons waiting to be learned. It wasn't the end of his journey, but perhaps it was a better beginning. The hotel room settled into a comfortable quiet as the day waned, the Los Angeles skyline turning shades of orange and deep purple. John sat by the window, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee as his mind replayed the meeting with Leah. The echoes of her words reverberated within him, heavy with implications he couldn't quite unravel. He thought about the turbulence, Chloe's panicked gasps, and the sharp, steady voice that had cut through it all. Leah had moved without hesitation, an act that seemed to hold more weight now than he initially realized. It wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a moment of resilience that shone against the backdrop of assumptions he hadn't been fully conscious of until now. "Daddy?" Chloe's voice broke the silence, sleepy and soft. John turned, finding her half asleep, her hair mussed and eyes half closed. The sight softened the knots in his chest. "Yes, sweetheart? Will we see Ms. Leah again?" she asked, her question laced with innocent curiosity. The query caught him off guard, but he nodded slowly. "Yes, Chloe, I think we will." Chloe's lips curled into a contented smile before she turned over and drifted back to sleep. John stared at her for a moment longer, the realization settling like an anchor in his chest. He didn't just owe Leah gratitude, he owed her more than that. Perhaps it was time he started to listen. To really listen. The next day, John arrived at the office earlier than usual. The hum of city life below vibrated through the walls as sunlight filtered through the tall windows. His colleagues filed in slowly, carrying the weight of expectation on their shoulders. Leah was already in the boardroom, poring over documents with the same focus that had marked her presence from the moment she walked into the company. She looked up briefly when John entered, her expression neutral but observant. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Good morning," he said, the words coming out more genuine than he expected. "Good morning," Leah replied, her voice measured but polite. The exchange was brief but significant, a small step toward normalcy, or at least a truce. The meeting began, covering topics that ranged from the company's recent financial performance to strategic partnerships. John watched as Leah spoke, her confidence and clarity undeniable. She navigated each question with composure, deflecting challenges without seeming combative. It struck him then that her strength wasn't just in her ability to respond, but in her capacity to lead without diminishing those around her. When it was John's turn to present, he cleared his throat and launched into his segment. He felt Leah's eyes on him, not in judgment, but in appraisal. He found himself choosing his words carefully, framing his analysis in a way that invited discussion rather than asserting dominance. The subtle change wasn't lost on his colleagues, a few of whom exchanged surprised glances. As the meeting wrapped up, Leah spoke again, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Thank you all for your input. We have challenging months ahead, but I'm confident that with a shared vision, we'll navigate them successfully." Her gaze shifted to John one last time before she collected her notes. It was a moment that might have seemed trivial to others, but to John, it was a silent acknowledgement. He wasn't sure whether it marked forgiveness or simply a new chapter, but it felt significant nonetheless. Later that afternoon, John returned to his desk, the steady hum of the office acting as a backdrop to his thoughts. A ping from his email pulled him from his reverie. It was a company-wide announcement detailing Leah's mentorship program aimed at fostering inclusivity and opportunity within the organization. The initiative involved pairing employees with young people from underrepresented communities, focusing on leadership and skill development. John's finger hovered over the RSVP link. A part of him hesitated. Mentorship had never been part of his professional identity. His success was built on cutthroat efficiency and solitary effort. But another part of him, the part that remembered Leah's unwavering composure on the flight, urged him to click. He exhaled and pressed the button, committing himself to a new role that felt both foreign and necessary. Minutes later, a follow-up message landed in his inbox, confirming his participation and listing his assigned mentee, Marcus Taylor, a high school senior with an interest in business analytics. John closed his laptop, a tight, unfamiliar anticipation building in his chest. The following day, John met Marcus in one of the smaller conference rooms reserved for mentorship sessions. The teenager was tall, with an eager energy that reminded John of himself at that age. Marcus's eyes were wide with curiosity, a notebook already open and pen poised as if ready to capture every word. "Hi, Mr. Davenport," Marcus said, extending a hand. His smile was genuine, unguarded. "Call me John," he said, shaking the offered hand and feeling a slight tug of nostalgia. They sat across from each other, the expanse of the table between them feeling both symbolic and literal. "So, what brings you to this program?" Marcus asked, tilting his head slightly. It was a simple question, but it carried an implication that made John pause. Why was he here? "Honestly," John began, finding himself more candid than usual, "I'm here to learn as much as to teach. I think this program is a chance for both." Marcus's grin widened, and the conversation began to flow more easily. They spoke about school, aspirations, and the path Marcus hoped to take. John found himself drawn into the young man's passion, the analytical insights Marcus shared sparking new ideas in John's mind. For the first time in years, he felt a connection that wasn't about competition or hierarchy, but about growth. An hour later, as they wrapped up their session, Marcus tucked his notebook under his arm. "Thanks, John. I'm excited for next time." "Me too, Marcus," John replied, surprised to realize he meant it. He watched Marcus leave, a quiet shift occurring within him, a glimmer of what Leah had spoken about, the importance of change. Not as an obligation, but as a means to uncover what lay dormant. As John stepped out of the conference room, he caught Leah's eye from across the hallway. She nodded subtly, and this time it felt like more than an acknowledgement. It felt like the beginning of understanding. The mentorship program had become part of John's weekly routine, and the changes in him were subtle but noticeable. Colleagues remarked on his newfound openness during meetings, where he listened more than spoke, considering ideas he might have previously dismissed. Leah observed from a distance, her expressions carefully neutral, but there was no denying that the atmosphere at the company had shifted since her arrival. One afternoon, a new initiative aimed at driving innovation across the company's various departments was announced. It was Leah's brainchild, a series of collaborative workshops that paired senior leaders with junior staff to foster cross-level communication. John's name was listed alongside Leah's for the kickoff session, set for the following week. The news sent a ripple through the office, sparking a range of reactions, from intrigue to speculation. John, for his part, felt the familiar tension coil in his stomach, but it was accompanied by something else: resolve. He was determined not to let his discomfort dictate the narrative this time. On the day of the workshop, the conference room was filled with a blend of seasoned professionals and enthusiastic newcomers. The air buzzed with anticipation as people settled into their seats, exchanging introductions and shaking hands. John took his place at the front, a seat left open beside him for Leah. She entered moments later, dressed in a navy blazer that exuded confidence. Her eyes met John's with a flicker of acknowledgement before she addressed the room. "Thank you all for being here," Leah began, her voice carrying a tone that commanded attention without demanding it. "Today's session isn't just about sharing ideas. It's about challenging assumptions, our own and those of others. Innovation thrives where comfort zones are abandoned." John nodded, letting her words sink in. The irony wasn't lost on him. The workshop began, with Leah and John leading discussions on strategic challenges the company faced. John noticed how Leah deftly engaged with each participant, asking questions that probed deeper than surface-level answers. Her approach was collaborative, drawing out thoughts and ideas that resonated beyond the room. "Mr. Davenport, what's your take on integrating our customer analytics with emerging AI solutions?" one of the younger participants asked, his voice tinged with both respect and nervousness. John glanced at Leah, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. "I think it's a strong step forward, but we need to consider how we build trust with our customers. Data privacy is a priority that can't be overlooked," John said, his tone measured. Leah's eyes flickered with what looked like approval. She picked up the thread seamlessly. Exactly. Trust is the foundation on which innovation stands. We're not just implementing new technologies, we're building a relationship with those who engage with them. The dialogue sparked more questions and ideas, and for the first time, John felt not just like a leader, but a participant in something larger. The room seemed to pulse with energy, and the divide between generations, backgrounds, and titles blurred. After the workshop concluded, the attendees lingered, discussing points raised during the session. Leah and John stood to the side, watching as small groups formed around tables, conversations continuing. "Good session," John said, turning to Leah. The statement felt almost like an olive branch, and he hoped she recognized it as such. "It was," Leah replied, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "It's interesting seeing you in this kind of setting, John. You seem different." John's gaze dropped for a moment before returning to meet hers. "I'm trying to be." A beat of silence stretched between them, filled with the unsaid. Leah's expression softened, but her tone remained professional. "Trying is the beginning. It's what follows that matters." He nodded, accepting the challenge implicit in her words. The weight between them, while still present, felt less burdensome. Later that evening, John sat at a cafe across from Marcus, who had asked to meet after their latest mentorship session. The teenager was bubbling with excitement, gesturing as he spoke about a project he was working on for school. His enthusiasm was infectious, and John found himself laughing at Marcus's animated recounting of a debate he'd had with a classmate. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," John said, the words slipping out before he could censor them. Marcus's eyebrows shot up, and then he grinned. "I hope that's a good thing," Marcus said, teasing but earnest. "It is," John said, surprising himself with the realization. The conversation shifted to college applications and future plans, and for a moment, John felt a rare lightness, untethered from the usual grind of his world. As they prepared to leave, Marcus glanced at the table behind them and did a double-take. John turned to see Leah seated with a small group, her laughter ringing out in a rare moment of levity. She noticed them and lifted a hand in acknowledgement, her smile lingering as she met John's eyes. The unexpected sight of her in a relaxed setting further humanized the woman he had initially viewed as a challenge to his authority. It reinforced a lesson that had begun to crystallize. People were more than the sum of their roles. Marcus elbowed John lightly. "She's impressive, isn't she?" John nodded, a smile breaking across his face. "Yes, she is." The next week brought new challenges. The company faced an unexpected client issue that threatened to disrupt a major project. The internal chatter was fraught with stress, and tensions ran high as the senior leadership convened for an emergency meeting. John arrived, the weight of the situation pulling at him, but he noticed Leah's composed demeanor as she set her notes on the table. "We need solutions, not finger-pointing," she said, cutting through the noise of competing voices. Her gaze swept the room, commanding focus. John felt the impulse to assert his perspective, but stopped himself, considering Leah's approach instead. When he spoke, it was with measured intent. "We need a multi-pronged strategy, immediate damage control paired with a transparent communication plan to reassure the client." Leah's eyes met his, a flicker of surprise softening into a nod. "That's a good starting point. Let's build on that." The team leaned in, and a more constructive conversation took shape. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan in place. The tension in the room lifted, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. After the meeting, Leah approached John, her expression unreadable. "I didn't expect you to lead the conversation like that," she admitted, her voice low enough to keep private. "I guess I'm learning," John said, half smiling. "Keep doing that," Leah replied. For the first time, her smile was unguarded. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was a sign of trust, a fragile bridge spanning the distance between their past and a possible future. The following days were a blur of strategy meetings, late-night emails, and hurried conversations in hallways. The pressure of the client issue weighed on everyone, but for John, it was an opportunity to test the changes he was trying to embrace. The plan they had devised under Leah's leadership was set into motion, and the initial results were promising. The client, reassured by their transparency and swift action, remained engaged, though cautiously. John found himself working closely with Leah more often. Meetings that once felt like battlegrounds now resembled collaborative think tanks. The shifts were small, almost imperceptible, but they chipped away at the walls he had long maintained. One afternoon, as John was reviewing a report in his office, a knock interrupted his concentration. Leah stood at the threshold, holding a folder. "Mind if I come in?" she asked. John set down the report, surprised. "Of course." Leah stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The room felt smaller, more intimate. She handed him the folder, her expression thoughtful. "I wanted to show you the preliminary feedback we received from the client." John flipped through the documents, noting the generally positive remarks. Relief settled over him like a warm blanket, momentarily easing the tension in his shoulders. "Looks like we're moving in the right direction," John said, meeting Leah's eyes. "We are," she agreed, but there was something in her voice that suggested more needed to be said. "John, I know stepping into new ways of working isn't easy, especially when it means challenging old patterns." He nodded, the words hitting a nerve that felt raw and exposed. "No, it isn't." Her gaze softened. "But you're doing it, and it's noticed. By me and by the team." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken understanding. Leah's acknowledgement wasn't just professional, it was personal. It was a testament to how far they had come since that turbulent flight. "Thank you," John said, the sincerity in his voice surprising even himself. "That means a lot." Leah's smile was faint but genuine. She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Keep at it, John. Change sticks when we keep choosing it, even when it's uncomfortable." He watched her go, a newfound sense of purpose settling over him. The path forward felt clearer, even if the steps were uncertain. That evening, John drove home with the city lights winking in the distance. The noise of traffic and the muffled buzz of the radio filled the car, but his mind was elsewhere. Chloe would be waiting for him, probably already in her pajamas and engrossed in a show. He thought about her question weeks ago, whether they'd see Leah again, and realized how much those moments with her anchored him. He pulled into the driveway, the house glowing warmly against the darkening sky. Chloe's silhouette appeared in the front window, waving energetically as he stepped out of the car. "Daddy's home!" she called as he walked in, her smile wide enough to erase the day's stress. "How was your day, Bug?" John asked, ruffling her hair as she jumped into his RMs. "Good! We learned about space in school," Chloe said, eyes wide with excitement. "Did you know that there are stars bigger than the sun?" "I did know that," John said, laughing. "But I think you just reminded me." As they sat down for dinner, Chloe's chatter filled the room, stories spilling out of her in a way that only a child's could. It was grounding, pulling John away from the corporate complexities and into the simple, reassuring rhythm of home life. Later, as Chloe got ready for bed, John sat on the couch and reflected on the day. The conversation with Leah replayed in his mind, her words a steady echo. "Change sticks when we keep choosing it, even when it's uncomfortable." He glanced at the coffee table where Chloe's latest drawing lay, a colorful picture of her, John, and Leah standing together under a bright sun. In the corner, a small scribbled plane flew above them, trailing a wavy line. The innocence of it struck him. Chloe had already connected the dots that he was only beginning to see. People are multifaceted, capable of being more than the sum of their initial impressions. A week later, an old friend from John's college days, Michael Hart, dropped by the office for a visit. Michael was loud and confident, a partner at a high-powered consultancy firm, and he brought with him an energy that was both invigorating and, at times, abrasive. "Davenport!" Michael's voice boomed as he entered John's office, clapping him on the back. "Still holding down the fort, I see." John smiled, a genuine warmth sparked by the familiarity. "Still here, trying to keep things moving." They sat and caught up, trading stories about work, life, and the past. But as the conversation shifted, Michael's demeanor changed, taking on a critical edge. He leaned forward, glancing toward the open door as if to ensure they were alone. "Listen, I heard about your new COO," Michael said, voice lowered. "Impressive resume, but I've been hearing a lot about the push for change. You're not buying into all that, are you?" John's smile faltered. He took a deep breath, memories of his own former mindset clashing with the strides he'd been making. "Change isn't always a bad thing, Mike," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "Sometimes it's necessary." Michael's brows rose in surprise. "You've changed, my friend. The John I knew wouldn't be singing that tune." John met Michael's gaze, the words coming more easily than he expected. "The John you knew didn't have much room for anyone else's tune. Maybe that needed to change." Michael chuckled, but there was a tension in the sound, as if he didn't quite know what to make of John's response. They moved on to safer topics, but the conversation lingered in John's mind long after Michael left. It was a reminder of who he had been, and how far he had come, and how far he still needed to go. The following day, Leah gathered the leadership team for a quick briefing on the mentorship program's progress. The atmosphere was charged, but in a different way than before. It was hopeful, even collaborative. John took his seat and caught Leah's glance as she began to speak. "Thanks to everyone who has participated in the mentorship program, we've seen a significant increase in engagement from our junior staff," Leah said, her tone measured but enthusiastic. "It's a small step, but it's a meaningful one." John felt a sense of pride as she continued. He thought of Marcus, the young intern whose questions and energy had reignited something in him. He glanced around the table, noticing that others were listening intently, their expressions reflecting a mix of curiosity and respect. Leah's eyes swept across the room, settling on John for a moment. There was a shared understanding there, a recognition of the work they had both put in, however different their journeys had been. The meeting concluded, and as the room emptied, Leah lingered. "John," she said, pausing by the door, "you've come a long way. I hope you know that." John nodded, the weight of her words settling comfortably on his shoulders. "I do, and I'm not done yet." A smile played on Leah's lips. "Good. Neither am I." They stood there for a moment, two leaders bound by a shared history and an unspoken promise that the journey of change was never truly over, but that each step made the next one possible. The mentorship program had brought an unexpected vibrancy to the office. Staff meetings buzzed with new ideas as junior employees felt more empowered to contribute. John felt it most acutely during his sessions with Marcus, whose enthusiasm was matched only by his relentless curiosity. Their conversations went beyond analytics and strategies, touching on future aspirations and life lessons that extended beyond the confines of the office walls. One morning, Marcus came to John's office, his excitement barely contained. He held a flyer printed in bright, bold letters, "Youth Leadership Summit. Keynote speaker, Leah Porter." "I signed up," Marcus said, eyes wide. "And guess what? I got in! I'll be presenting a mini-workshop there." John felt a rush of pride, tempered by a reminder of the distance between his past attitudes and the present. He had once looked at events like these as distractions. Now he saw them for what they truly were: opportunities. "That's great, Marcus," John said, a smile breaking across his face. "I'll be there to support you." Marcus's grin grew wider. "You will? That would be amazing, John." The sincerity in Marcus's voice struck a chord in John. It wasn't just mentorship. It was mutual respect, and it was the kind of connection he hadn't sought out before. But now it felt essential. Leah's leadership had sparked changes throughout the company. New roles were created, and John found himself asked to lead an initiative on integrating mentorship strategies into the company's long-term culture. The proposal was met with mixed reactions: support from those inspired by recent successes and skepticism from others who viewed it as a shift from traditional practices. At the next executive meeting, Leah presented the proposal with confidence. John watched as she navigated the questions, noting the blend of patience and assertiveness that defined her leadership style. When the floor opened for input, John cleared his throat. "I believe this initiative is more than just a change in policy. It's an investment in the company's future," he said. meeting the eyes of his colleagues, some of whom looked surprised by his support. We've seen firsthand how fostering talent at every level strengthens not just our team, but our brand. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling in. Leah's expression was unreadable, but a subtle nod confirmed her acknowledgement. After the meeting, John and Leah walked down the corridor together, their steps in sync. The silence between them felt more comfortable now, less charged. "I wasn't sure if you'd support it so strongly," Leah admitted, a hint of curiosity in her tone. John's smile was small but genuine. "I wasn't sure myself at first. But I see what it's doing, how it's changing things for the better. I want to be part of that." Leah looked at him for a moment, and the weight of her consideration felt like a silent conversation. "That's good to hear, John. It makes a difference." The Youth Leadership Summit was held in a sleek downtown conference center. Rows of chairs faced a stage, adorned with banners and posters featuring images of young leaders and mentors. The air buzzed with excitement, punctuated by the sound of attendees greeting each other and exchanging stories. John sat in the audience, his eyes scanning the room until they settled on Marcus, who was setting up his workshop materials. The young man caught sight of John and waved enthusiastically, a bright smile lighting up his face. The keynote speaker took the stage, and Leah's voice filled the room. She spoke not just about her own journey, but about the collective power of mentorship and change. Her words resonated, echoing the lessons John had been learning firsthand. "We are not defined by the roles we play, but by how we use those roles to impact others," Leah said, her gaze sweeping across the audience. It landed briefly on John, and for a moment he felt seen, not as an executive or a colleague, but as someone on a path of transformation. When Marcus's turn came, he spoke confidently, outlining his vision for integrating data analytics into community programs. His voice was strong, clear, and laced with the excitement of someone who believed in what he was saying. John felt a swell of pride, mingled with the realization that this was what real influence looked like. Not the boardroom negotiations or power plays, but the quiet acts that built others up. After the event, John approached Leah, who stood surrounded by attendees, thanking her for the keynote. She turned to him as the crowd dispersed, her expression softer than usual. "I didn't know you were coming," Leah said, a note of pleasant surprise in her voice. "I came to support Marcus," John said, then added, "and to see your keynote." Leah's eyebrows lifted slightly. "And what did you think?" John chuckled, a sound that felt more relaxed than it had in a long time. "You were right. We're defined by how we use what we have. I'm starting to understand that." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Leah nodded. "Understanding is the hardest part, but once you have it, everything else is practice." "Then I'll keep practicing," John said, the determination in his voice matching the look in his eyes. Despite the positive momentum, not everyone in the company was on board with the changes. Resistance brewed quietly, voiced in private conversations and subtle challenges. John found himself at the center of one such challenge during a meeting where traditionalists voiced concerns over the new mentorship focus. "This is all well and good, but are we losing sight of what drives profit?" one executive questioned, leaning forward with an air of authority. "We need to make sure these initiatives aren't diluting our core goals." John took a breath, choosing his response carefully. "We're not losing sight of profit. We're expanding what drives it. A strong, engaged team isn't just good for morale, it's good for business." The room went quiet, eyes shifting between him and the other executive. Leah's expression was calm but supportive, and her slight nod felt like a silent partnership. After the meeting, John caught Leah in the hallway. "Do you ever worry that this will all fall apart?" he asked, the vulnerability in his question catching even him by surprise. Leah paused, considering his words. "Every day," she admitted, "but that's what makes it worth fighting for." The simplicity of her answer struck a chord. John realized that his fear of failure was no different from anyone else's, and that perhaps it was the willingness to face it that defined true leadership. The following weeks brought small victories and setbacks, but the company began to find a new rhythm. The mentorship program continued to grow, bringing new energy and innovation. John's relationship with Marcus deepened, and he found himself learning as much as he was teaching. One afternoon, Marcus came into John's office with an acceptance letter in hand. "I got into my first-choice university," he said, eyes bright with excitement. John stood, a grin breaking across his face. "That's incredible, Marcus. You earned this." "Thanks for everything, John. I couldn't have done it without you." The sincerity in Marcus's voice moved John in a way he hadn't expected. "No, Marcus, you could have, but I'm glad I got to be part of the journey." Later that day, as John sat in his office watching the late afternoon sun filter through the blinds, Leah walked by and stopped. Their eyes met, and for a moment, no words were necessary. The silence between them spoke of challenges faced, bridges built, and the understanding that real change was a shared effort. Leah smiled and continued on her way, and John leaned back in his chair, a sense of peace settling over him. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. Despite the positive strides made in the mentorship program and the new initiatives being implemented, John could feel an undercurrent of dissent among some of his colleagues. It wasn't overt. It came in the form of quiet conversations that stopped when he entered the room, sideways glances during meetings, and whispered complaints about the company losing focus. One day, while getting coffee in the break room, John overheard two senior managers, Mark and Susan, talking in low voices. "I just don't see why we need to focus so much on this mentorship stuff," Mark muttered. "Sure, it's good for morale, but it's not what keeps the company profitable." Susan sighed, her voice hesitant. "I get what you're saying, but Leah's been clear about this direction. Besides, have you seen how some of the younger staff have been performing? It's hard to argue with results." Mark scoffed, taking a sip of his coffee. "Temporary boost, that's all. People get excited about new things, but it'll fizzle out." John stood just out of view, feeling a twinge of frustration and a stronger determination not to let the progress they'd made unravel. He took a breath, stepped into the room, and greeted them with a nod. The room fell silent, and Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Morning," John said, pouring himself a cup. He glanced at them both, catching their eyes in a way that suggested he'd heard more than just their greetings. "Change takes time, but it's worth it. You'll see." He left the break room before they could respond, the tension following him back to his office. The old John might have ignored the comments or even agreed with them, but now he felt compelled to counter them, to reinforce the path they were on. It wasn't just about following Leah's vision, it was about believing in it. That afternoon, Leah knocked on John's office door. She walked in with her usual composed demeanor, holding a folder filled with performance data. "John, I wanted to review the latest metrics from the mentorship program," Leah said, setting the folder on his desk. "We're seeing a 15% increase in productivity in teams where junior members are engaged in mentorship activities." John's eyebrows lifted in genuine surprise. 15%? "That's significant." Leah nodded, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "It is, but it's also stirring resistance in some corners. I'm aware that not everyone is convinced this is the right direction." John's gaze dropped to the report, but his mind returned to the whispers he'd overheard earlier. "I've heard some of it firsthand," he admitted. "Old habits die hard." Leah leaned back in the chair, crossing her arms. "It's not unexpected, but it's a challenge we have to face. Progress invites scrutiny, and not everyone will see the value until it becomes undeniable." A silence settled between them as they each considered the weight of her words. John broke it with a quiet question. "Do you ever doubt it? What we're doing?" A rare vulnerability softened Leah's features, but only for a moment. "Doubt? Sure. But every time I see someone like Marcus find their voice, or watch teams start to collaborate in ways they never did before, it reinforces why we're doing this." John nodded, the doubt that had clung to him like an old coat slipping away. "Then we keep going." Leah's smile was small but genuine. "Yes, we keep going." That evening, John arrived home later than usual. Chloe was waiting on the porch, her hair tied in two messy braids, holding a stack of papers she waved excitedly as he walked up. "Daddy, look! We're doing a project at school where we have to talk about what our parents do for work," she said, her words tumbling over each other. "Can I talk about you helping people at your job?" John's heart swelled at the earnestness in her voice. He knelt down to her level, taking the papers from her hands. "Of course, Bug. We can work on it together." Chloe beamed and dragged him inside to the kitchen table, where she had already set up markers and glitter. As she drew and colored, John told her about the mentorship program, explaining it in terms she could understand. "Sometimes grown-ups need help too, just like you need help with your homework or your games," he said. "And it's my job to help them find the best way to do things." Chloe looked up, her eyes serious. "Like how Ms. Leah helped me on the plane?" The comparison caught John off guard. He nodded slowly, the memory of that moment as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. "Exactly like that, Chloe." She smiled, turning back to her drawing and adding Leah's name in big, careful letters beside a cartoon version of herself and John. The innocence of her vision, the simplicity of seeing Leah as part of their world, touched something deep within him. It was another reminder of why he was on this path and why he needed to stay the course. The next week brought another wave of challenges. A major client raised concerns about the direction of their latest project, citing miscommunications that put their contract at risk. The pressure mounted, and it felt as if the weight of the company's future rested squarely on the shoulders of the senior leadership team. The boardroom was filled with tension as the top executives gathered to address the crisis. Leah took her place at the head of the table, her expression steely but calm. "Let's focus on solutions," she said, scanning the faces in the room. "We need clear communication and a unified response." Mark, the same manager John had overheard in the break room, shifted in his seat and spoke up. "With all due respect, Leah, maybe we've been spending too much time on these side programs. Our focus should be back on the bottom line." John felt a surge of irritation but took a deep breath before speaking. "The mentorship program and the strategic initiatives we've started aren't distractions. They're investments. The teams involved are stronger and more innovative because they feel supported and valued. This isn't taking away from the bottom line, it's reinforcing it." A few nods around the table signaled support, while others, like Mark, remained skeptical. Leah's gaze met John's, an acknowledgement passing between them. She turned back to the room, her voice steady. "John is right. The changes we've implemented are about building long-term resilience. This is a test of that resilience." The discussion continued, and by the end, a plan was in place. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step forward. When the meeting adjourned, Mark approached John, a grudging respect in his eyes. "You really believe in this, don't you?" he asked. John met his gaze, unwavering. "I do, and I think, given time, you will too." Mark didn't respond, but the pause before he turned away spoke volumes. The days that followed were marked by long hours and difficult conversations, but slowly the company began to recover. The client's concerns were addressed, and the mentorship program continued to grow, gaining traction even among the skeptics. John met with Marcus one afternoon, finding him more confident than ever. They worked through data, talked about upcoming college plans, and shared stories that spanned work and life. When Marcus left, John felt a deep sense of accomplishment that had little to do with metrics or quarterly gains and everything to do with impact. Later, as John packed up for the day, Leah appeared at his office door. She didn't step inside, just leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "Long day?" she asked. John chuckled. "Feels like they're all long days lately." "Worth it, though," Leah said, a note of conviction in her voice. "Yeah," John said, nodding. "It really is." They shared a smile, not needing more words. It was an unspoken promise, a shared understanding that while the road was long and filled with challenges, they were walking it together. And that made all the difference. The weeks following the client crisis were marked by a cautious optimism. The mentorship program was gaining traction beyond its initial supporters, and productivity metrics confirmed what Leah had known all along. Empowered employees were effective employees, but with change came resistance, and pockets of doubt still lingered within the company. John sat at his desk one evening, the office dim and quiet except for the sound of the cleaning crew in the distance. He glanced at the file open on his computer, an analysis showing the positive impact of the new initiatives. The numbers were encouraging, but they weren't enough to erase the pushback he'd felt from certain corners of the company. A knock on the door broke his concentration. Leah stepped inside, her eyes catching the tired lines on his face. "Burning the midnight oil?" she asked with a small smile. John leaned back in his chair. "Trying to convince myself that we're on the right track." Leah's gaze softened. "Doubt is part of the process, John. But doubt is different from failure. The fact that you're questioning means you care, and that's what makes the difference." He let her words settle. They spoke to a part of him that was still learning to reconcile his old ways with the path he now found himself on. "Do you ever feel like we're one wrong move away from everything falling apart?" "All the time," Leah admitted, crossing her arms as she leaned against the doorframe. "But that's what leadership is, isn't it? Standing firm when you're surrounded by uncertainty." John nodded, a hint of a smile breaking through. "Thanks, Leah. I needed that." "Anytime," she said before turning to leave, pausing at the door. "Oh, and don't forget, tomorrow's the company town hall. It's a good chance to show everyone that we're moving forward." The mention of the town hall brought a familiar anxiety. It was another test, another moment where the progress they'd made would be laid bare for everyone to see. The next day, the company's largest meeting room filled with employees from every department. The hum of conversation grew louder as people settled into their seats, a mix of anticipation and skepticism in the air. John stood near the back, watching as Leah stepped onto the small stage. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice carrying confidently across the room. "We're here today to talk about where we're headed and, more importantly, how we're getting there." John felt a swell of admiration as Leah spoke. She outlined their progress, supported by the data that showed improved team performance and increased employee engagement. But she didn't shy away from the challenges they still faced. Her honesty was disarming, drawing people in rather than pushing them away. "I know that change isn't easy," Leah continued. "I know that some of you have doubts. That's fair. But I also know that we've already seen what we're capable of when we step outside our comfort zones. The mentorship program is just the beginning of what we can achieve together." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd, and John noticed the subtle shifts in expression. Hesitant nods, the furrowed brows of contemplation. Leah turned slightly, catching his eye, and John felt an unspoken invitation. He stepped forward. "I'd like to add something," John said, the room falling silent as all eyes turned to him. "I was one of the skeptics when we first started down this path. I didn't see how mentorship or collaboration would make a real difference. But I was wrong. I've seen firsthand what these changes mean, not just for productivity, but for the people here. Our colleagues, our teams. We're stronger for it." The silence hung for a moment longer before a smattering of applause broke out, growing as others joined in. John caught sight of Marcus in the crowd, his grin wide and genuine. The momentum of support felt like a shift, a tipping point that suggested their efforts were starting to resonate. After the town hall, employees lingered, discussing what had been said. John navigated through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging words with those who approached him. The reception was warmer than he'd expected, and for the first time, he felt a collective sense of purpose rather than isolation in his beliefs. As the room began to empty, Mark approached, his expression unreadable. John braced for a comment steeped in skepticism, but instead, Mark extended a hand. "You spoke well, John," Mark said, his tone grudging but sincere. "Maybe there's more to this than I thought." John accepted the handshake, surprise mingled with relief. "Thanks, Mark. It means a lot." The exchange was brief, but it felt significant, a step toward dissolving the barriers that had separated them. As John turned back, he saw Leah standing by the doorway, watching. She nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of the progress they had made, both in the company and in themselves. That evening, John took Chloe out for ice cream, a ritual they hadn't shared in weeks due to the demands of work. They sat outside the shop, the summer evening warm and fragrant with the scent of nearby flowers. Chloe licked her cone, her feet swinging under the bench. "Did you have a good day, Daddy?" she asked, glancing up at him with ice cream smudged on her nose. John laughed, wiping it away with a napkin. I did, Bug. One of the best I've had in a while. Was it because of Ms. Leah? Chloe asked, her innocent question catching him off guard. Yes, he said after a moment. It was, in part. She helped me remember what's important. Chloe's eyes sparkled with understanding, though she couldn't fully grasp the complexities behind his words. She didn't need to. Her trust in him was enough to make everything feel worthwhile. Back at the office the next day, John found a note on his desk. It was handwritten, something rare in the era of digital communication. The message was simple but powerful. Progress isn't measured in leaps, but in the steps we take each day. Keep going. Leah? John read it twice, the weight of those words settling comfortably on his mind. It wasn't a declaration or an award. It was an affirmation that the journey, however difficult, was worth continuing. He pinned the note to his bulletin board, a reminder that leadership wasn't about always knowing the answers. It was about being willing to find them, even when the path was unclear. The mentorship program continued to thrive, and John watched as Marcus's confidence grew. The young intern was no longer hesitant. He spoke with the authority of someone who felt valued and heard. And as John worked with him, guiding and learning in equal measure, he realized that leadership wasn't about holding on to power. It was about sharing it. In that moment, with the city buzzing outside his window and the echoes of progress whispering through the office halls, John knew that change had taken root, not just within the company, but within himself. The sense of progress that filled the office was interrupted by an unforeseen challenge. A sudden shift in market trends put pressure on one of the company's largest projects, and deadlines that had once seemed manageable now loomed with daunting urgency. The leadership team convened in the main conference room, tension thick in the air. Leah stood at the front, arms crossed, listening as department heads outlined their concerns. John sat a few seats down, taking in the rapid exchange of questions and potential solutions. The old habits of quick defensive responses itched at the back of his mind, but he pushed them down, focusing instead on listening and weighing the options being presented. I understand the concern, and we're going to need all hands on deck to navigate this, Leah said, her voice steady. She glanced around the table, eyes landing on John. John, would you be willing to lead a task force to stabilize this project? Your experience and connection with the team could be the edge we need. The room turned its attention to him. John nodded slowly, the responsibility heavy but not unwelcome. I'll do it, he said, meeting Leah's eyes. We can pull this off, but we need full transparency and input from every department. Leah's expression was approving. That's exactly what we need. Let's start by breaking down the immediate tasks. The meeting shifted gears, and John jotted down notes, already formulating a plan. The task ahead was formidable, but he felt a pulse of excitement mingled with determination. It was a chance to put everything he'd learned into action, not just his technical expertise, but the leadership style he'd been cultivating. The following days were a blur of late nights, early mornings, and relentless problem-solving. John's task force included a mix of seasoned veterans and newer employees, including Marcus, who volunteered for the extra work with enthusiasm that bordered on contagious. The team met in smaller groups, mapping out timelines, double-checking data, and troubleshooting potential pitfalls. One evening, Marcus stayed late, poring over figures and graphs. John sat across from him, sipping a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. The young intern's focus reminded him of himself when he first started out, driven by ambition, but now tempered by a more inclusive perspective. You're doing good work, Marcus, John said, breaking the silence. Marcus looked up, surprise in his eyes before it morphed into a wide grin. Thanks, John. That means a lot coming from you. John leaned back, watching as Marcus turned back to his work, a quiet pride warming his chest. The office, usually so sterile and cold after hours, felt alive with purpose. It was more than just saving the project. It was about proving that their collective efforts could weather storms. As the task force worked, John noticed a shift in the office atmosphere. Those who had been resistant to Leah's changes now seemed to observe the unfolding crisis with more open minds. Mark, the skeptic who had once challenged the mentorship program's value, stopped by John's desk one afternoon. "John, got a minute?" Mark asked, his tone neutral but without the edge it once carried. "Of course," John replied, gesturing for Mark to sit. "I've been watching the way your team is handling this," Mark said. "It's impressive. The mix of experience and new ideas, it's working. I'll admit, I wasn't sold on all of this at first. But I'm starting to see what you and Leah are doing." John's surprise gave way to a nod. "I appreciate that, Mark. It's taken time, but I think we're getting somewhere." Mark glanced around the office, where team members from different departments were collaborating in ways that hadn't happened before. "If there's anything I can do to help, let me know." "Thanks," John said, sincerity in his voice. "We'll need everyone we can get." Mark stood, the brief conversation leaving an impact that went beyond words. It was a small victory, but it signaled that change was taking root in places John hadn't expected. By the end of the week, the strain of long hours and high stakes began to show. The task force was making progress, but the final push required more than technical skills. It needed morale. John called a team meeting late Friday afternoon, the room filled with tired faces and half-empty coffee cups. "I know we're all exhausted," John began, glancing at the team. "But we're close. What we've done so far is incredible, and I have no doubt we can finish this. Take this weekend to rest, recharge, and come back ready to push through." The team exchanged glances, some nodding, others too tired to react. Marcus, however, raised his hand. "Before we go, I just want to say that being part of this has been an honor. I've learned more in the past few weeks than I ever thought possible. Thanks for giving me the chance." A small wave of applause rippled through the room, bringing a smile to John's face. The meeting ended on a high note, and as people began to leave, Leah appeared at the door. She had been watching from the hallway, a subtle smile on her lips. "You're leading well, John," she said, stepping inside after most of the team had dispersed. "I can see the difference." John looked around the room, the energy still humming even as the space emptied. "It's because they're invested. They believe in this." Leah nodded. "And that's because they believe in you." The weight of her words settled in, reinforcing the path he had chosen. Leadership, he realized, was more than just guiding others through the easy times. It was being the anchor when waters got rough. Monday arrived, and with it, the final push to complete the project. The task force worked seamlessly, collaborating across spreadsheets and conference calls, refining their presentation and triple-checking figures. The tension was palpable, but it was also productive, driven by a shared purpose that transcended individual roles. Late that night, as the project neared completion, Marcus approached John with a set of revised data points. "I double-checked everything. These should match up now." John reviewed the numbers, nodding with approval. "Good work, Marcus. This is what we needed." Marcus beamed, and the rest of the team exchanged relieved smiles. The sense of accomplishment was almost tangible, a testament to the unity that had been built over weeks of shared effort. "All right, everyone," John said, standing up. "Let's get some rest. We've done it." A round of applause broke out, tired but triumphant. Leah walked in just as the clapping subsided, her eyes sweeping over the room with a look of pride. "Well done, all of you," she said. "I knew we could do it." The final presentation to the client the next morning was smooth, the team's hard work evident in every slide and detail. The client, initially apprehensive, nodded along, their expressions shifting from concern to approval as the meeting progressed. When it ended, John felt a rush of relief. The client stood, extending a hand. "Impressive work. We're glad to be moving forward with you." John shook hands, the victory resonating in his bones. Leah met his gaze across the table, and this time her smile was wide and unguarded. It wasn't just a win for the company, it was a testament to the power of trust, resilience, and a willingness to change. That evening, the office was quieter than it had been in weeks. John sat at his desk, the events of the past month playing through his mind. The task force, the long nights, the growing camaraderie, all of it had reshaped not just his role, but how he saw himself as a leader. A knock on the door made him look up. Leah stood there, leaning casually against the frame. "We did it," she said, a statement that carried relief and triumph. John nodded. "We did." Leah walked in, placing a small envelope on his desk. "A note from Marcus. He left it with me earlier." John opened it, the handwriting familiar. "John, thank you for showing me what leadership looks like. Real leadership. I'll never forget it. Marcus." The words blurred slightly as John read them, a rare emotion swelling in his chest. He looked up at Leah, who nodded knowingly. "It's moments like these that make it worth it, don't they?" she said, her voice quiet but firm. John's smile was small but full of meaning. "They do." They stood in shared silence, the sounds of the city filtering through the window as a backdrop to the quiet triumph they shared. The road ahead was still uncertain, but now it felt more like an adventure than an obstacle. Bolstered by trust and the belief that they were moving in the right direction. The success of the client project marked a turning point not only for the company, but for John personally. The atmosphere in the office was lighter, charged with a sense of shared accomplishment. But John knew that victory alone wouldn't erase the doubts some still held. Building trust was an ongoing process, and it would take more than one success to solidify the changes. One morning, John received an invitation from Leah to join a leadership panel at the next company-wide event. The topic: Fostering Growth and Resilience in the Workplace. The invitation felt like an acknowledgement, not just of the recent project's success, but of the shifts in his approach to leadership. He accepted without hesitation. The event took place in the company's spacious auditorium, filled with employees eager to hear from the leadership team. Leah opened the session with a speech that set the tone. Direct, warm, and thought-provoking. When it was John's turn to speak, he walked to the podium, scanning the sea of faces before him. "When I first joined this company, I thought leadership was about control," John began. "But over the past year, I've learned that real leadership is about trust. Trust in your team, in the process, and in the idea that change isn't just possible, it's necessary." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience, followed by attentive silence. John continued, weaving in stories of Marcus, the task force, and the mentorship program. By the time he stepped down, the room was filled with a thoughtful quiet that spoke volumes. After the panel, employees approached him, some with questions and others with words of gratitude. Mark was among them, offering a nod that carried a newfound respect. Later that day, Leah found John in the break room, nursing a cup of coffee. The midday sun cast a warm glow over the space, creating an unexpected sense of tranquility. "You did well today," Leah said, pouring herself a cup and leaning against the counter. "Thanks," John replied, a hint of relief in his voice. "It felt different." "It felt honest," Leah corrected, her eyes meeting his. "People can tell the difference." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the office a distant hum. The tension that had once defined their interactions had been replaced with an ease that felt almost natural. "Leah, I know we've come a long way," John said, choosing his words carefully. "But I also know it wasn't easy. For either of us." "No, it wasn't," Leah agreed, her tone thoughtful. "But that's what makes it meaningful." John nodded, the weight of shared experiences filling the space between them. "I'm grateful for everything." A smile crossed Leah's face, warm and unguarded. "So am I." The leadership panel sparked new momentum in the office. Employees began expressing interest in extending the mentorship program to community outreach efforts, an idea that resonated deeply with Leah's vision of a socially responsible company. John volunteered to help organize an event where company employees would mentor high school students from local schools, offering workshops on topics ranging from business fundamentals to interview skills. On the day of the event, the office buzzed with energy as students arrived, wide-eyed and eager. John was paired with Marcus, who was now taking a more active role in mentoring others. Watching Marcus teach a group of students reminded John of how far they had both come. "All right, everyone, let's talk about how to present your ideas effectively," Marcus said, projecting a confidence that filled the room. John stood at the back, offering support but letting Marcus lead. It was a full-circle moment, a quiet triumph that spoke to the impact of nurturing potential. Leah circulated the room, engaging with students and employees alike. When she reached John, she gave him an approving nod. "This is what it's all about," she said, her voice low but resonant. "It is," John agreed, "and it's just the beginning." That evening, John shared stories from the outreach event with Chloe as they sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She listened intently, her eyes lighting up as he described the students' excitement and Marcus's role as a mentor. "Can I come to one of those events someday?" Chloe asked, her voice full of hope. John chuckled, pulling her into a side hug. "Someday soon, bug? I promise." Chloe grinned and leaned her head against his shoulder. The simple gesture brought a wave of peace over John. For so long, his life had been defined by ambition and the pursuit of success. Now, it was colored by connection, by moments like these that made all the challenges worth it. As the stars appeared, John felt a quiet resolve settle within him. The changes in his life had been gradual, marked by missteps and moments of doubt. But they had also been transformative, opening doors to a future that was richer and more fulfilling than the one he had once envisioned. A month later, during a company-wide gathering, Leah stood before the room to acknowledge the progress the company had made. She spoke about resilience, growth, and the importance of coming together to achieve common goals. As she neared the end of her speech, she paused and looked out at the crowd. "I want to recognize someone who has not only adapted to change, but has become a leader in fostering it," Leah said. "John Davenport, your commitment to mentorship and your dedication to this company's vision have set an example for all of us." The room erupted into applause, and John felt a flush of surprise and gratitude. He nodded, catching Leah's eye as she smiled at him. It was a moment of recognition that cemented the journey they had taken together. From the turbulence of first impressions to the steady ground they now stood on. After the applause subsided, John stood and said, "Thank you, Leah, and thank you to everyone here. This has always been about more than just one person. It's about what we can accomplish when we come together." The event ended with conversations that spilled into the hallways, filled with optimism and plans for the future. John walked out with Marcus and a few other mentees, their laughter ringing out as they discussed the next steps for the mentorship program. As John drove home that night, the city lights stretched out before him, a glittering map of possibility. He felt the weight of his journey, not as a burden, but as a testament to what could be achieved through resilience and openness. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it was one he was eager to travel. Back at home, Chloe was asleep, curled up with her stuffed bear. John sat beside her for a moment, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. He felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that the example he set for her now was one of growth, empathy, and integrity. In the quiet of the night, John whispered, "We keep going," a promise to himself and to the future he was building, not just for him, but for Chloe, for Marcus, and for everyone who believed in what they could achieve together. The community outreach event had sparked something larger than anyone anticipated. Employees who had once been silent observers now volunteered their time, mentoring local students or participating in planning sessions for future programs. The office was alive with purpose, each day bringing new ideas and connections. John found himself in meetings with junior staff he had rarely interacted with before. They came from different departments, bringing with them fresh perspectives that challenged his thinking and invigorated his approach. Among them was a young analyst named Rebecca, whose knack for simplifying complex data caught John's attention. "You know, Rebecca," John said during one brainstorming session, "your approach to presenting data could be a huge asset to the mentorship program. Have you considered running a workshop on it?" Rebecca's eyes widened, and a smile spread across her face. "I'd love to, but I wasn't sure if I could." "You absolutely can," John replied. "We'll make it happen." Moments like these reaffirmed what he'd learned. Growth didn't just come from leading, it came from lifting others up and watching them step into their own potential. The new initiatives meant more interaction between John and Leah. Their conversations had shifted from cautious exchanges to genuine dialogue filled with mutual respect. One afternoon, as they reviewed the quarterly progress report, Leah leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful look on her face. "It's interesting, isn't it?" she said, gesturing to the graphs that showed improved employee satisfaction and increased retention rates. "A year ago, none of this would have been on our radar." John nodded. "A year ago, I wouldn't have seen how important it was." Leah tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. "And now?" "Now I see that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room," John said, his tone serious. "It's about being the one who listens, who supports others, and builds something that lasts." A warm silence settled between them, filled with the shared understanding of the journey they had taken. It wasn't just about professional gains, it was about learning to connect, to build trust, and to foster a culture that thrived on inclusion. "You've come a long way, John," Leah said quietly, "and I'm glad we've gotten here together." "Me too," John said, the words carrying the weight of everything unsaid but deeply felt. One evening, Marcus invited John to dinner with his family as a thank you for the support he'd provided. John accepted, touched by the gesture. The dinner was held in a modest home filled with warmth and laughter. Marcus's parents were welcoming, their pride in their son evident in every glance. "Thank you for everything you've done for Marcus," his mother said, as she set down a dish of steaming vegetables. "He talks about you all the time." John felt a flush of humility. "It's been my privilege. Marcus has taught me as much as I've taught him." The meal was filled with stories and laughter, a stark contrast to the formal dinners John had grown accustomed to in his corporate life. It was here, surrounded by people who saw each other as more than just roles or job titles, that he felt the true impact of the journey he'd embarked on. It was a reminder that leadership wasn't confined to boardrooms. It extended into the lives and stories of those they touched. The next morning, John found an envelope on his desk, written in Chloe's familiar scrawl. He opened it to find a letter that read, "Dear Daddy, I drew a picture of you, Marcus, and Ms. Leah, because I think you're all superheroes. I'm proud of you for helping people. Love, Chloe." Attached was a drawing of John, Leah, and Marcus standing together, each wearing capes, with Chloe in the corner, waving. A lump formed in his throat as he traced the crayon outlines, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and emotion. Leah walked by his office and saw him holding the letter. She knocked gently and stepped inside. "Everything okay?" John looked up, the warmth in his expression unmistakable. He handed her the drawing, and she smiled as she examined it. "I think she got your best side," Leah joked lightly, but there was an unmistakable fondness in her voice. John chuckled. "She's been watching all of this, you know? It makes me realize that everything we do, every choice we make, matters more than we think." Leah nodded, returning the drawing to him. "It does, and that's why we keep pushing forward." They shared a moment of silence, each caught in their own thoughts. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, filled with understanding, gratitude, and the unspoken promise that they would continue to build on what they'd started. The company's outreach efforts began to attract attention from local organizations and even rival firms. Invitations for partnerships came in, asking for collaborations on community projects and mentorship programs. Leah and John sat in her office, going through the proposals. "This is bigger than I expected," John said, his voice tinged with awe. Leah smiled, the excitement in her eyes contagious. "It's proof that what we're doing isn't just good for us, it's setting an example." John met her gaze, the realization settling in. "So where do we start?" "Right here," Leah said, pointing to a proposal from a local high school. "They want us to help set up a mentorship program modeled after ours. I think we should send a few of our team members, and I'd like you to lead that." A sense of pride mingled with anticipation in John's chest. "I'd be honored." Leah's smile deepened. "Then let's get started." Later that week, Mark approached John as they packed up for the day. The office was quiet, most employees having already left for the weekend. Mark hesitated before speaking, his usual confident demeanor replaced with a rare vulnerability. "John, I wanted to say something," Mark began, glancing down at his hands. I didn't believe in any of this at first. The mentorship, the outreach, all of it. But seeing what it's done for the company, for the people here, I was wrong. John looked at Mark, the admission striking deeper than any formal apology. We've all had doubts, Mark. What matters is what we do next. Mark nodded, relief in his expression. I'd like to be more involved moving forward. If you'll have me. Of course, John said, extending his hand. They shook, a gesture that carried more than just agreement. It was reconciliation, a step toward unity. The final week of the quarter brought with it a sense of accomplishment. John stood in the boardroom during a wrap-up meeting, looking out at the team. Leah addressed the group, her voice full of conviction. We've come a long way, and we're not done yet. But today, we celebrate what we've achieved. Together, she said, raising a toast. John lifted his glass, catching Marcus's eye across the room and giving a subtle nod. As the team clinked their glasses and exchanged smiles, John felt a wave of contentment wash over him. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge, every moment of doubt. As he stood among his colleagues, the hum of conversation filling the air, John knew that the future was no longer something to fear. It was something to build. Together, piece by piece, with trust, resilience, and a belief in each other that could withstand whatever came next. The mentorship program had not only impacted the company internally, but had begun to extend its influence outside the office walls. High schools, local nonprofits, and even neighboring businesses reached out to collaborate or model similar initiatives. The outreach event John led at the high school had set a precedent, and the positive feedback poured in. Letters of thanks from students and teachers decorated the community board in the company break room, each one a reminder that their work resonated beyond the confines of corporate life. John stood in the hallway one morning, reading through the notes pinned up by employees. One letter caught his eye. To the mentors, thank you for believing in us when we didn't believe in ourselves. You've shown us that success is not just for those who start at the top, but for anyone willing to work hard and learn. L.T. A smile crept across his face as he turned to see Leah approaching, holding a file. She paused, her eyes following his to the board. Sometimes it's easy to forget how far the ripples can go, Leah said, her voice thoughtful. John nodded. It's more than I ever expected, but it's what we needed. Exactly, Leah said. And now there's talk of expanding this program to include partnerships with larger organizations. The idea excited John. I'm in. Whatever it takes. Leah's smile was warm, approval evident in her expression. Good, because they're going to want you to lead that charge. The next phase of the initiative involved meeting with potential partners, organizations that could amplify the mentorship program and expand its reach across the city. John and Leah scheduled a series of meetings, including one with a well-known nonprofit focused on educational equity. The boardroom felt charged with energy as the nonprofit's director, Karen Wilkes, a woman known for her sharp mind and relentless dedication, sat across from John and Leah. The discussion moved fluidly, touching on shared goals and logistical strategies. John presented data on the program's success, highlighting stories like Marcus's that illustrated real, tangible impact. What we're seeing here isn't just a blip. It's a foundation for sustained growth, John said, his confidence unwavering. And with your partnership, we can scale this to reach more communities. Karen leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing in consideration before she smiled. I like what I'm hearing. Let's make it happen. Leah exchanged a brief, triumphant look with John. It was the start of a new chapter, one that reached beyond the company and into the heart of the community. Marcus had become a symbol of the mentorship program's success, and as he prepared for college, the company decided to host a small send-off celebration for him. The break room was decorated with balloons and banners, and employees gathered to share stories and wish Marcus well. John watched as Marcus, standing at the center of the crowd, smiled bashfully at the attention. Leah stepped forward to speak, the room quieting in anticipation. Marcus, you came to us as an intern, full of potential, and you're leaving as a mentor, a leader in your own right, Leah said. You've set an example for all of us, and we're proud to have been part of your journey." Applause erupted, and Marcus blushed, waving sheepishly. John stepped forward, shaking Marcus's hand with a firm grip. "You're going to do great things, Marcus. Don't ever doubt that." Marcus's eyes shone with gratitude. "Thank you, John, for everything." As the gathering wound down, Marcus pulled John aside. "Before I leave, there's something I wanted to say. You're not just a mentor, you're a friend. I hope to pay forward everything you taught me." The simplicity of the statement struck John, leaving him momentarily speechless. He nodded, giving Marcus a pat on the shoulder. "You will, Marcus. I have no doubt." The success of the community partnerships brought newfound attention to the company. Articles in local business journals featured interviews with Leah and John, discussing the benefits of integrating mentorship and outreach into corporate culture. The once skeptical board members had shifted their tune, now embracing the positive press and increased employee satisfaction. Leah invited John to speak at an upcoming industry conference about their program's journey from concept to community impact. It would be his first public appearance outside of the company's walls to discuss these initiatives, and it felt like a milestone. The day of the conference, John stood behind the podium, the faces of industry peers and business leaders looking back at him. He took a breath, remembering the plane ride that had set this transformation into motion. "Change is a word that makes many of us uncomfortable," he began. "But it's also the reason we're all here today. A year ago, I was someone who viewed change as a threat. Now I see it as an opportunity to grow, not just as a company, but as people." He spoke about Chloe, Marcus, Leah, and the countless moments that had redefined what leadership meant to him. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, not just for the story, but for the promise that others could embark on similar journeys. After the conference, Leah approached John, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "You did well up there." "Thanks," John said, the tension in his shoulders easing. "I wasn't sure how it would go." "You were honest," Leah said, "and people can see that. It makes all the difference." John looked at her, the weight of their shared path behind them. "It does, and I wouldn't have made it here without your push." Leah's expression softened. "We all need a push sometimes, but you did the work." They stood in a comfortable silence, the noise of the conference fading as their shared journey echoed in the space between them. It was a moment not of finality, but of understanding, an acknowledgement that their paths, once so different, had converged to build something meaningful. The next few months were filled with new opportunities and challenges, but the foundation they'd built held strong. The company's mentorship program was recognized as a model for other businesses, and partnerships with local organizations continued to grow. One evening, as John was leaving the office, he saw Leah in her office, still reviewing reports. He knocked lightly on the door. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked, echoing the words she'd once said to him. Leah looked up, a smile breaking her serious expression. "Just finishing up." John stepped inside, leaning against the doorway. "I wanted to say thanks for everything. This has been more than just a job. It's been a second chance." Leah's eyes met his, and she nodded. "Second chances are rare, John, but you've made the most of yours." As he left the office, the city lights stretched out before him, bright and full of promise. The future wasn't just a distant possibility, it was here, shaped by every choice, every act of kindness and resilience. And John knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't face them alone. As the mentorship program grew, John and Leah began receiving invitations to collaborate on broader community projects. One such invitation came from a coalition of local businesses and civic leaders who wanted to create a network of mentorship programs that would span multiple industries. The goal was to empower students and young professionals with access to different career paths and mentorship opportunities. John attended the first planning meeting with Leah in a historic conference hall downtown. The room was filled with leaders from tech companies, nonprofits, and educational institutions, all gathered under the premise that investing in people was investing in the city's future. Karen Wilkes, the nonprofit director they had partnered with earlier, stood to open the meeting. We're here because we believe that the best way to strengthen our community is to share what we know, to build bridges across sectors and provide a pathway for those coming after us." John exchanged a glance with Leah, who nodded subtly. They were part of something bigger now. And it wasn't just about their company. It was about shaping a culture of mentorship that could ripple through countless lives. The planning meetings became a regular fixture in John's calendar. Each session brought new faces, from CEOs to educators and student leaders, all working toward a common goal. One afternoon, during a break between sessions, John sat on the steps outside the hall, the air cool and crisp. He was soon joined by a young man named David, a recent college graduate who had been invited to the coalition to share his perspective as someone who had directly benefited from mentorship programs. "John Davenport, right?" David asked, extending his hand. John nodded, shaking it. "That's right. And you're David. Karen mentioned you. What brings you here?" David's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "I wanted to share how much these programs mean. When I was in high school, I didn't think college was for me. But then I met a mentor who changed my mind, showed me what I could do. Now I'm working in tech and mentoring students myself." John listened, reminded of Marcus and all the others whose stories had woven into the fabric of this journey. "It's incredible, isn't it?" he said. "How one person can change everything." David nodded, a wide grin breaking across his face. "Yeah, and now it feels like my turn to pay it forward." The brief conversation lingered with John as he returned inside. It reinforced the idea that change didn't just happen from the top down, it was layered, involving everyone from seasoned leaders to those just starting their path. Weeks later, the city council announced it would host a gala to honor local leaders and initiatives that had made a significant impact on the community. John received an invitation to attend as part of the recognition for the mentorship program's contributions. The night of the gala, John dressed in a sharp suit, Chloe's proud encouragement echoing in his mind. "You're going to look like a movie star, Daddy," she had said, giggling as she adjusted his tie. The event was held in a grand ballroom, its chandeliers casting a warm glow over the gathered guests. Leah arrived shortly after John, dressed elegantly and carrying herself with the composed confidence that had become familiar to him. As the evening unfolded, speeches were made and accolades were given. When it was time for their recognition, Leah took the podium first. "This isn't just about what one company or one person can do. It's about what we can achieve when we commit to being more than our roles, when we commit to each other." Applause filled the room, and Leah turned to John, inviting him to join her on stage. He stepped up, the sea of faces watching intently. "I've learned that leadership isn't just guiding a team or hitting numbers," John said. "It's about building, supporting, and learning from one another. And if we can do that, then our reach goes far beyond the walls of an office." The applause that followed felt different from any he'd received before. It was genuine, not just for what he'd accomplished, but for what they had done together. After the event, John and Leah walked out into the cool night air. The streetlights painted the sidewalk in golden hues, and the noise of the city buzzed around them. "Quite a night," John said, hands in his pockets. "It was," Leah agreed, looking out at the skyline. "It's moments like these that remind me why we started this." John looked over at her, a quiet appreciation in his gaze. "I think we've done more than we ever thought possible." "Not just us," Leah said, shaking her head. "Everyone who believed in it, even when it was hard." John nodded, taking a deep breath. "You know, a year ago, I wouldn't have believed that I'd be standing here, working on community projects and talking about mentorship programs." Leah laughed lightly. "Neither would I. But here we are." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of traffic a steady backdrop. It was a shared acknowledgement that change, though slow and often painful, could lead to something extraordinary. The next day, John returned to the office, where Chloe had left another drawing on his desk. This time, it depicted him, Leah, Marcus, and Chloe herself, all standing in front of a school surrounded by students. Above it, she had written, "Helping people makes us strong." John smiled, the simple, heartfelt message sinking in. Chloe's innocence and optimism reflected the essence of what he had come to understand. Being strong wasn't about being unyielding. It was about being willing to grow and support others along the way. Leah walked in as he was taping the drawing to his wall. She glanced at it and smiled. "Looks like we have a new team member," she said. "She's been on the team all along," John replied, turning to her. "I think we all have." The following week, Leah called an all-hands meeting to discuss the future of the mentorship program and their upcoming partnerships. The room buzzed with anticipation as she outlined their plans to expand their efforts citywide, partnering with schools, nonprofits, and other companies. "This is the next step," Leah said, her voice filled with conviction. "And we're going to need everyone's ideas, commitment, and passion to make it happen." John stood beside her, feeling a sense of unity that was palpable. The applause that followed was not just for her words, but for the shared belief that they were doing something that mattered. As the team broke out into discussion groups, John caught Leah's eye and nodded. They were no longer just colleagues navigating an uncertain path. They were partners, building a future that valued growth, empathy, and connection. Outside, the city pulsed with life, a backdrop to their story. John knew the road ahead would bring more challenges, but he was ready, not just because he had changed, but because they had changed, together. And that made all the difference. The start of the new mentorship initiatives coincided with Marcus's first day at college. John received a text early in the morning, "Heading to campus today. Thanks for everything, John. I'll keep in touch." The message was simple but packed with meaning. It was a reminder of how far Marcus had come, and how mentorship had been the catalyst. John typed a quick reply, "Proud of you, Marcus. Keep pushing forward. You'll do great things." The company had arranged a small scholarship for Marcus, funded by employee donations and matched by the leadership team. It wasn't just financial support, it was a symbol of the community they had built, rooted in trust and encouragement. John sat back in his chair, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment as he thought about Marcus walking across the campus, ready to tackle the next phase of his life. A few days later, John was surprised to see Karen Wilkes from the nonprofit at the company's reception desk. She had been instrumental in helping expand the mentorship program citywide, but impromptu visits were rare. "Karen, to what do we owe the pleasure?" John asked, greeting her with a handshake. Karen's smile was warm. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. I have some news that might interest you." They walked to John's office, where Karen handed him a folder. Inside were letters of intent from several companies wanting to partner on a multi-year mentorship initiative that would span the state. John's eyes widened as he flipped through the documents. The scale of what they had started becoming more evident. "This is big," he said, looking up at Karen. "It is," she agreed. "And it's because you and Leah proved that this kind of program works. Not just in theory, but in practice." John felt a surge of pride. They had taken an idea, nurtured it, and turned it into something with a life of its own. Now it was inspiring change beyond their own walls. Leah called an impromptu meeting with John and a few other key team members that afternoon. The room hummed with anticipation, the kind that came with big announcements. "I just got off a call with the city council," Leah said, eyes bright with excitement. "They're considering funding a joint initiative to support mentorship and skill-building programs for underrepresented communities. They want us to lead it." The room buzzed with chatter as everyone processed the news. John's heart raced, not with the anxiety that used to accompany major projects, but with genuine excitement. The program had come so far, and now it was poised to become a model for other cities. John spoke up, the confidence in his voice echoing through the room. "If we're going to do this, we need a team that's as passionate as the vision itself. And we need to involve those who've experienced the power of mentorship firsthand." Leah nodded. "Agreed. Which is why I think you should reach out to Marcus. Let's bring him back as an advisor." A smile spread across John's face. It was a perfect fit. Marcus's journey embodied everything they wanted this initiative to represent. Potential realized through guidance and opportunity. John reached out to Marcus, who was adjusting to college life, but couldn't hide his excitement at the chance to be involved. They arranged a meeting at the company, and Marcus arrived with a mix of confidence and nerves. "It's good to be back," Marcus said as he walked into John's office, "and I'm excited to contribute in any way I can." "You've earned this, Marcus," John said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Your insight and experience are going to be invaluable." Leah joined them, welcoming Marcus with the same warm professionalism that had inspired him from the start. "We're glad to have you, Marcus. This isn't just about expanding our program, it's about showing what's possible when people invest in each other." The planning sessions began with Marcus contributing ideas based on his experiences as both a mentee and mentor. His presence injected a renewed energy into the team, reinforcing the belief that their work was meaningful and far-reaching. The night before the City Council's decision on the initiative, John sat at home with Chloe. She was working on homework, her face scrunched up in concentration, while John prepared notes for his presentation to the council. Chloe glanced up, noticing his focused expression. "Are you nervous, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. John paused, the question breaking through his concentration. He set down his pen and nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "A little? It's a big day tomorrow." Chloe walked over and hugged him tightly. "You're going to do great. You always help people, and that's what heroes do." John felt the familiar lump in his throat as he returned the hug. "Thanks, Bug. That means a lot." The reassurance from Chloe reminded him why he was doing all of this, not just for professional achievement, but to show her that helping others and building something bigger than oneself was the truest measure of success. The day of the presentation arrived, and John stood before the city council, flanked by Leah and Marcus. The room was filled with people who had come to support the initiative, including representatives from the nonprofit, local schools, and other businesses. John spoke with a calm conviction, detailing the mentorship program's origins, successes, and the potential it had to impact even more lives. Marcus stepped forward to share his story, his voice steady as he recounted how mentorship had shaped his path and given him a future he hadn't thought possible. When the presentation concluded, the room held its breath as the council members deliberated. It didn't take long. The head councilwoman smiled and nodded. "Congratulations! We're excited to move forward with this initiative," she announced, the room erupting in applause. John turned to Leah, a grin breaking across his face. Marcus's eyes shone with excitement, and the trio exchanged a look that spoke volumes. It was more than a win. It was a confirmation that the path they'd taken was not just right, but necessary. That evening, the team gathered at a local restaurant to celebrate. The room was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and stories of the journey they'd all shared. Marcus sat beside John, the young man now an advisor and partner in the mission that had brought them together. Leah raised a glass. "To everyone here, and to those who believed in us, even when it was just an idea. This is proof that when we support each other, there's no limit to what we can accomplish." "To new beginnings," John added, lifting his glass. The room echoed the toast, filled with the warmth of a shared purpose. John glanced around, catching the eyes of colleagues and friends, new and old. They were all part of this story, each contributing to the path that had brought them here. As the celebration continued, John's phone buzzed with a message from Chloe. "I'm proud of you, Daddy. Love you." He smiled, pocketing the phone. The journey ahead would have its challenges, but for now, he allowed himself to revel in the moment, a moment defined by growth, connection, and the unwavering belief that they were building something that mattered. The weeks following the City Council's approval were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and strategic planning sessions. The initiative now had the backing to expand into neighboring cities, an ambitious plan that would require coordination, dedication, and more partnerships. John, Leah, and Marcus worked closely, each bringing unique strengths to the table. In one planning session, John looked around the room at the team they had built. Marcus was explaining a strategy for outreach to local schools, his voice confident and clear. Leah sat next to him, nodding in agreement and jotting down notes. The energy in the room was palpable, a far cry from the hesitant meetings that had defined the early days of their work together. Leah caught John's eye and smiled. "I think we're ready," she said softly. John nodded. "We are. Let's make sure we do this right." One morning, as John settled into his office, a knock at the door made him look up. Standing there was Michael Hart, an old friend and partner from his early career days. John hadn't seen Michael since they had last talked, back when John's career had been more focused on profit and prestige. "Michael," John said, standing to shake his hand. "It's been a while." Michael's grin was friendly, but held a touch of curiosity. "Heard about what you've been doing here. The mentorship program? It's impressive. Thought I'd stop by and see for myself." John gestured for him to sit. They caught up on old times, trading stories and laughs, but Michael soon steered the conversation toward the program. "Honestly, John, I didn't peg you for the type to lead something like this. You used to be all about closing deals and bottom lines," Michael said, raising an eyebrow. John chuckled, not offended but reflective. But things change, Michael. Sometimes you realize there's more to success than just numbers. It's about what you leave behind, the people you help along the way." Michael nodded slowly, absorbing the change in John's tone. I can see that, and it looks like you're making a difference." "More than I ever thought possible," John said, meaning every word. Michael stood, looking around the room filled with charts, plans, and notes that spoke to the scale of their new endeavor. "Keep it up, John. You're onto something here." John watched as Michael left, a sense of closure mingled with pride. The conversation confirmed what he already knew, that the path he had chosen, however unexpected, was the right one. As the program's expansion continued, John and Leah worked with local leaders from the nearby cities joining the initiative. The calls were filled with discussions on logistics, shared goals, and plans for adapting the mentorship model to different communities' unique needs. Marcus led sessions on best practices, sharing his insights and learning from others' perspectives. During one of these sessions, John marveled at the shift in his role. Once he had been the solitary leader, focused solely on individual success. Now he was part of a collaborative effort that stretched beyond his company, involving educators, business leaders, and young mentees from across the region. "It's like a living organism," Marcus said one afternoon, looking over the project map pinned on the wall, each part helping the other grow. "That's exactly what it is," John agreed. "And the best part is, it's just getting started." To celebrate the launch of the expanded mentorship program, the company hosted a community event in a large public park. There were tents with booths for different organizations, workshops on everything from resume writing to public speaking, and panels where mentees shared their stories. Chloe came with John, running ahead to explore the booths while he set up with Leah and Marcus. The park buzzed with activity, families and young people moving between stations and talking with mentors and volunteers. Leah took the stage to address the crowd, her voice carrying confidently. "Today, we're here not just to celebrate what we've accomplished, but to look forward to the lives we're going to touch, the paths we're going to change, and the impact we're going to make together." John watched Chloe at the front, clapping enthusiastically, and felt an overwhelming sense of pride. When Marcus spoke, sharing his own journey and how mentorship had changed his life, John's eyes met Leah's in a moment of shared recognition. This was more than they had ever envisioned, and it was only the beginning. The buzz from the community event reached further than expected. Local news outlets ran stories highlighting the mentorship program, its expansion, and its growing influence. The initiative became a model that other businesses in the state were encouraged to replicate. A week after the event, John received a call from a national business magazine. They wanted to feature the program as an example of how companies could integrate corporate responsibility with meaningful community engagement. Sitting at his desk, John flipped through the questions the reporter had sent in advance. The spotlight was new, a kind of recognition that wasn't just about profit margins or industry rankings, but about the true essence of leadership and growth. When the article was published, it featured quotes from Leah, John, and Marcus, and included testimonials from mentees and community leaders. The headline read, "Building a Future, One Mentor at a Time: How a Corporate Initiative Became a Statewide Movement." The day the article came out, Leah walked into John's office holding a copy. "Look at us," she said, half joking but with clear pride in her voice. "We've come a long way." John took the magazine from her, reading the headline again. "We have, and we're just getting started." Later that evening, John returned home to find Chloe waiting with a new drawing. This one showed him and Marcus in front of a group of smiling kids, with Leah standing to the side, a guiding figure. Above the scene, Chloe had written, "Teamwork makes the dream work." John's heart swelled as he taped the drawing next to her earlier ones on the kitchen wall. Chloe climbed onto his lap and looked at the display. "Did you have a good day, Daddy?" "The best," John said, wrapping an arm around her. "And you know why?" "Why?" Chloe asked, tilting her head. "Because we're helping people," John replied. "And there's no better feeling in the world." As the night settled around them, John felt a peace that he hadn't known a year ago. It wasn't just about the professional milestones or public recognition. It was about the connections they had built and the difference they were making, one life at a time. As the expanded mentorship program reached its one-year milestone, John sat down in the company's boardroom, now filled with a mix of old and new faces. Leah called the meeting to order, her expression one of quiet pride. "Today, we're here to look back on the past year, not just at what we accomplished, but what we learned," she said. The room's energy was palpable, charged with the sense of being part of something meaningful. John took the floor, glancing at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "This year has been about more than just numbers or checklists. It's been about stories. Stories of growth, hope, and resilience. We've seen how mentorship can transform not just careers, but lives." The room listened intently as John shared key takeaways from the program's data: increased job satisfaction, higher retention rates, and more community engagement. Yet the most striking points were the personal stories, the letters from students who had found their voice, from employees who had rediscovered their passion, and from partners eager to replicate the success in their own communities. After the meeting, John returned to his office to find Chloe waiting with Leah, who had brought her in as a surprise. Chloe's face lit up as she saw him, and she raced to his side. "Daddy, guess what?" Chloe said, her eyes wide with excitement. John laughed, kneeling to her level. "What's that, Bug?" "They want me to draw a picture for the mentorship event next month," Chloe said proudly. "Ms. Leah said it would be the cover of the program." John glanced at Leah, who smiled. "We thought it was fitting to include the work of someone who's been part of this journey from the start." Emotion welled up in John's chest. "That's amazing, Chloe. You're going to do a great job." Chloe hugged him tightly, and for a moment, the noise of the office faded into the background. It was a full-circle moment, not just for him, but for everything they had built. That evening, John sat with Chloe in her room as she sketched ideas for the program cover. The room was filled with the scent of crayons and the soft scratch of pencil on paper. "Are you going to help more people, Daddy?" Chloe asked, focused on her drawing. John watched her, the simplicity of her question resonating deeply. "Yes, Bug, that's the plan." Chloe paused, looking up at him. "Good, because helping people makes us strong." John smiled, the truth of her words sinking in. It was a lesson that had taken him years to learn, and one that now felt as natural as breathing. The mentorship program had brought John and Leah into a close working partnership, one defined by mutual respect and shared vision. One morning, Leah called John into her office. The sunlight filtered through the large windows, casting warm patches across the room. "I wanted to tell you this before anyone else," Leah began, her tone serious but kind. "I've been offered a position on the board of a national nonprofit focused on youth mentorship and career development." John's eyes widened. "That's incredible, Leah. You deserve it." Leah smiled, though it was tinged with emotion. "It's a new chapter, but I'll still be involved here as an advisor. This place, these people, have become too important to step away completely." John felt a mixture of pride and sadness. "You're going to be missed around here, but it's the perfect role for you, and it shows just how far we've come." "It does," Leah said, "and it's because people like you made it possible." They shook hands, a gesture that spoke of everything they had built, faced, and accomplished together. Leah's announcement set off a chain of events that underscored the resilience of the mentorship program and the community they had created. Marcus was offered a part-time role with the city's youth development department, helping bridge the program's initiatives with broader community efforts. "Looks like we're both moving up," Marcus joked when he told John about the offer. His smile was wide, the confidence that had once been buried now shining through. John laughed. "You deserve it, Marcus. Keep pushing forward." The mentorship program continued to thrive, with new mentors stepping up and more students enrolling. The walls of the office were now adorned with photos from events, testimonials, and notes from students whose lives had been touched. The company hosted a celebration to mark the one-year milestone and Leah's new position. Employees, community leaders, mentees, and their families filled the event hall, which was decorated with banners, balloons, and a display of Chloe's cover art. Leah gave a speech reflecting on their journey. "This has been a testament to what happens when we choose to believe in each other, to push past comfort, and reach for something greater." John followed, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "This program isn't just about what happens in the office. It's about how we take what we've learned and use it to build stronger communities. And I'm proud to stand with all of you who make that possible." Applause filled the room, and John felt the weight of the past year settle around him, not as a burden, but as an achievement shared with every person present. As the event wound down, John stood outside with Chloe, watching as guests said their goodbyes and walked into the night. The city lights twinkled, a backdrop to the laughter and chatter that drifted through the open doors. "Did you have fun tonight?" John asked Chloe, who was holding his hand tightly. She nodded, yawning but smiling. "I did. And I'm going to keep drawing pictures for you, Daddy. For all the people you help." John bent down and kissed the top of her head. "I'd like that, Chloe. More than you know." They stood together, looking out at the city, a shared understanding between them. The road ahead was filled with unknowns, but it was also filled with promise, of new connections, continued growth, and the enduring power of helping others. In that moment, John knew that what they had started was not an end, but a beginning. And as he looked down at Chloe, he knew that he was leaving her a legacy not of trophies or accolades, but of empathy, resilience, and hope. "We keep going," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. And in the glow of the streetlights, it felt like a promise well made. If you enjoyed this story and want to follow more journeys of resilience, growth, and community, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Thank you for being part of our journey.